Hello everybody, welcome back to another Godot Code review. This is part of a series where I'm opening up your Godot projects and taking a look at the scripts and the scene structure and offering my feedback and critique about what's going on. And the purpose of this series is to be educational to both the developer and you. And today we're going to be taking a look at this top-down shooter template. This is from a developer that wishes to remain anonymous, but the developer has indicated that they want to make a top-down shooter template that they can use for future projects. So what we're going to do is I'm going to run the project first. We'll take a look at what's going on, and then we'll dive into some of the code and see what's going on under the hood. All right, so we've got this top-down shooter template, very nice menu. Let's go ahead and take a look at the settings real quick. I'm not sure if these settings do anything. I don't think that there's any music or anything right now on the menu, but it looks very nice. So we'll return here and we'll go ahead and start. We got typical WASD movement, left mouse to shoot. It looks like these might be explosives. Yes, they are. Very juicy effects, generally speaking. I think it looks and sounds pretty good. And I think space to dash, yeah. And what do we got? Do I have right click? Right click doesn't do anything. So let's see if we can find a different weapon here. There's what looks like a chest here. E to open. Oh yes, here we go. So I just picked up a shotgun. I know you can't tell because of everything going on here. But it looks like we've got multiple different enemy types. Some enemies have guns and shoot bullets. Some enemies ram the player. And then some enemies appear to be more of like kind of fodder here. And of course we've got these, I don't know what these are, collectibles of some kind, but I've got 66 of them, so. All right, and low health gives us a nice little red health vignette here. That's pretty cool. I just picked up some health and some coins from that chest. I believe that's basically the entirety of the game. Again, this is like a template, so I don't expect there to be a whole lot of gameplay, but looks like we got portals and we have a crash actually. This crash looks like maybe we just don't have a second level configured here. So let's take a look. So this is a levels array, which is a packed scene of levels. And this is coming from, this is world.gd. So let's open up world here. And I'm just going to make sure that's what's going on here. So we've got world. If we look at the export variables here, it looks like we do have 2 levels. Okay, what is level 2 looking like? So this is level 2. Okay, so level 2 is just this room here that doesn't do anything. So it just looks like we have an out of bounds error because of there's not more than 2 levels, and I tried to go to the 3rd level and it didn't work. That's not necessarily a problem. Again, this is just a template. You may want to add something in here if you were the developer of this to add some kind of graceful handling, or maybe write in a transition here to go to like the game complete screen or something like that, just so that you have it ready to go. But again, for a template project, it's not really that important to handle this scenario. I just think that you could add it to the template project if you wanted. Now, one other thing that I'm noticing here is we've got a bunch of errors in the debug console, and these errors are can't change this state while flushing queries. This error happens, typically speaking, at least in the instances I've seen it happen. This happens when you're trying to add physics-related nodes or remove physics-related nodes to and from the scene tree inside of something like an area entered or area exited signal handler. So you connect to the area entered signal, and then you try to either delete an object or remove an object from the scene tree, or rather a node from the scene tree that has to do with physics, like an area 2D or like a body or something like that. And it has a problem. I don't know exactly what this error indicates, but this indicates that there's some kind of physics state change that's happening during a context where that shouldn't be happening. So we've got a ton of these errors here, and let's see where this is pointing us to. So we've got this happening in an anonymous lambda, which is in the bomb. So if we look at this, so we've got bomb.gd, healthbox.died.connect, and we're using a lambda function, an anonymous lambda function to use as a signal handler, which is super nice, by the way. So basically what's going on here is that the developer has just defined a function inside of here. So this whole block becomes a callable. So typically, in this .connect method, you need to provide a callable, and a callable is essentially just a reference to a function. And what you can do is you can use an anonymous function here. This is functionally equivalent to me just adding in here func on died like so, and then pasting this code in here and then referencing it like so. That's functionally equivalent to the Lambda function that we're using in here. So it looks like this healthbox.died, this appears to be the health component. So .died.connect, and we're going to instantiate what? An explosion scene. So let's take a look at the explosion scene. So if I open up bomb.tscn and we go back to the 2D view here, so there's our bomb. I'm going to click on the root node here, and we've got the explosion scene. We'll open that here. And yeah, so we've got a damage box here, which appears to be the component that this developer is using to transfer damage to various things. This is an area 2D. So this goes to exactly what I was saying. So it looks like when we go to our script here, inside of this signal handler for healthbox.died, this is adding a child that has an area 2D as one of its descendants. So my suspicion is that this died signal is emitting during a signal callback. Healthbox is receiving damage during like an area entered signal, which is ultimately calling this add child. So let's go to the healthbox, and we're going to open up this script, and let's take a look at where this happens. So here we've got on area entered, which is connected, it looks like, through the editor, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, so we've got a signal here. Node has one connection. Yeah, it's connected here. So this was connected through the editor. That's fine. I typically don't like connecting signals through the editor because it actually modifies the scene file. And as a matter of fact, it might be useful to open that up in something like VS Code and look at what that looks like. I've opened this healthbox.tscn inside of VS Code just so I can look at it as text, and we can see here, yeah, this is the signal connection data. It actually gets stored in the scene file. So one of the reasons why I don't like doing signal connections through the editor is because it stores those signal connection data inside of the scene file itself. And that means that if I were to ever go into my script and change this method name or just remove it because I don't need it anymore, Godot is not going to automatically remove that signal, and I could get into a bad state where it attempts to connect to a non-existent signal. I just don't like that. I know that it's a built-in feature of Godot, but it's like you have data in two places. You've got the signal connection defined in your code, but then you've got it defined in the scene file at the same time. I'd much rather have a single source of truth and just do all the signal connection and definition inside of the script itself and just ignore that editor feature so that I can just flat out avoid any data out of sync issues. That said, as long as you're consistent and you consistently use the editor to connect and disconnect signals, then it should be fine. Obviously, you can make it work, but I'm just saying, as a personal preference, I just prefer to handle everything in the script purely because then it becomes the single source of truth with respect to signals. Anyway, in this on area entered signal, we've got this check to see if the area being entered is a damage box, and then we're dealing damage here. So if I go into this damage method, we could take a look and let's see where the died.emit is happening down here. So what's happening is that this died gets emitted as part of the on area entered signal. So we're still in that area entered signal handler. The thing you need to know about signals in Godot is that when you emit a signal, anything that is connected to that signal, any function that's connected to that signal gets executed immediately unless it has been connected otherwise, like with the deferred flag. As soon as this died gets emitted, anything that's connected to this died signal will be executed before this dead equals true. And that means that it's also still executing as part of this on area entered signal handler. So this is why we are in a bad physics context when we're trying to add, for instance, the explosion to the scene tree, which has this damage box area 2D. And that's what's producing this error. So the easy way around that is if I go to my bomb here, and I have this explosion scene. What I typically do is, actually we can fix this, I think maybe for all instances. Let's take a look at, so that's the anonymous function. What is happening here? We've got the same thing happening, it looks like in lootable. So if I go to my lootable.gd, yeah, so in here, healthbox.died.connect a loot. This is the same problem, is that this died signal is happening again in that area entered signal handler, and then loot is being called immediately, and it's trying to add a child, which is what? I don't actually know where this is being used. So let me open up actually let me search for lootable in here. And I'm gonna right click on the lootable scene and do view owners. And it looks like, yeah, enemy parent. So enemy parent looks like the base scene for enemies. And if we go to the lootable here, inspector, yes, we've got items here, blood pool is the only item in the lootable here. Okay, that's kind of, so that looks like an effect. What I expect the lootable to do is spawn items that are lootable. And I'm assuming the blood pool is not lootable, but also I'm not seeing any relevant items here. So maybe if I look for other enemy types, enemy basic maybe, and I go into lootable here, open up items. Yeah, we've got the coin. Okay, so the collectibles I'm assuming are called coins. Let's open that up and yeah, so the coin has 2 area 2Ds. So to go back to the script, what's happening in this, anytime a coin is created, it's happening inside of the died signal handler, which again is still happening during that physics context of the area entered. So we are, for bombs, we're adding area 2Ds as soon as the thing dies, the health box component dies. And for loot items, we're creating items that have area 2Ds during that died signal emission as well. So how do we fix this? Well, the way that I would fix this is I would actually go to the health box. Back in the health box script here, this on area entered, what you can do actually is, all of this is fine. I would probably keep all of this here because this is not modifying any physics state. But for this damage here, I would actually call this in a deferred fashion. And what call deferred does is it just pushes the function call to the idle frame. So it will be outside of the physics context in which this area entered signal is happening. And that's as simple as just doing damage.call deferred. And you still want to pass in your arguments here. So area.damage and area.knockback. And now if the died signal gets emitted, it will be happening on idle frame, which means that it's safe to add and remove physics areas from the scene tree. So with that change in place, let's run the game and we're going to destroy some bombs and collect some coins. And we're going to see if that error has disappeared. So there's 1 coin I just collected and we'll destroy some bombs. And let's just go ahead and close the game and yeah, no more errors. So that's typically, if you ever see that error, you should definitely look at your area entered signal handlers. Now, one thing that I'm noticing here in this damage function is that there's a lot of wasted space here because this entire block is indented. So this is a kind of a minor thing, but what I would do here is instead of doing if not dead and then indenting everything underneath this, I would simply do an early return. I would do if dead return. And then I can delete this if not dead and unindent the rest of this here. And that just looks cleaner to me. I know that there are some developers that are adamantly against early returns, and I can understand that argument too, because if you have an early return somewhere in a function, you may be puzzled as to why the lower half of the function is not executing because you missed an early return, especially if the early return is nested somewhere in the function, like down here. Right? If I put a return there for some reason, I may not see that or notice that that's there and be wondering why none of this other code is running. So some developers don't like early returns. I actually really do like early returns, especially when they're at the beginning of the function. So if you want to just do a bunch of validation at the top of your function, so if dead, we don't want to do anything, so just return. So one thing that I'm kind of puzzled by is how this coin is actually being picked up. The coin has a health box, but I'm not seeing anywhere where that health box signal is listened to. Oh, there's a connection in here. Area 2D, area entered. Oh, this is just back in the health box script. Oh, I see. So give item here gives global coins plus equals 1. Where is the give item called? I'm not entirely sure. Let's look for give item. Oh, I see. This is extending collectible. So we go to collectible and there's a give item function. Okay. And this is where the health box. Okay. So it looks like we have a base. I should have looked at this. I should have noticed that this coin is inherited because of the yellow nodes here. So if we look at the base collectible here, we open that script, we've got healthbox.died.connect give item. And then it looks like it's up to each collectible to sort of override. This give item is being called when healthbox.died is emitted. So now the question is, what is causing the healthbox.died to be emitted on a collectible? I'm going to take a look at maybe the collision here. The mask, it's looking for the player layer. Let's go to the player and let's open up not the health box, the damage box. Okay, right. So it looks like that's what is happening. So there's a damage box on the player and it looks like it's just, a capsule shape. It exists on the player layer and the collectibles have a health box that is scanning for that layer. I guess what's actually technically happening is the player is damaging the collectibles when the area is entered by that damage box. technically that works, right? It works to do it that way. I think the developer may have done this because the developer can configure like death sounds and other things in here, which can be very nice, I guess. So the developer has kind of cleverly used existing functionality rather than build like a pickup component. That said, I think that semantically, it doesn't make a lot of sense, right? That it shouldn't be the case that coins are being damaged by the player. I would probably prefer personally to make an explicit pickup component and have a pickup area on the player for the purpose of collecting items. But, you know, I would say again, it's a pretty clever way of using already built functionality. I wouldn't say that this is necessarily a problem. I just think like for the purpose of clarity, I, as a new developer looking at this project, would have been much more comfortable understanding what's going on if there was like a ground pickup component that the collectibles use instead of a health box. Now, one thing that I'm noticing here too is the player is centered around the origin like this. Now, this is not necessarily a problem. However, this is a clear indicator, I think, that Y sorting is not being used. So this is more of a style thing, but let me just make sure ordering Y sort enabled is off. Where is this player? So let's show in file system, view owners. The player is inside of the world scene, and it looks like everything just gets added underneath the world here. So enemies will be added to the world and all that good stuff. Actually, let's look at level 1. Oh, it looks like all the enemies are placed in the world. Okay, I see. So all the enemies are pre-placed in the world, but I'm pretty sure that Y sort is not being used here. So ordering, yeah, no Y sort. What I'm going to do is I'm going to disable the player health box so that I can't take damage. So I'm going to uncheck this mask here. I'm pretty sure that's going to work. And I'm going to show you that Y sort is not a thing. So what's going to happen here is the enemies are always going to render behind the player, even though it looks like the player should be behind the enemies. Now, this is fine. I mean, this is just a stylistic choice, but I'm going to show you real quick what you'd have to do if you wanted to enable Y sorting. So if you want to get the player to render behind enemies based on its depth or based on how far it is up the screen or down the screen, I'll show you what you want to do for that really quick. So first, you want to orient your player's sprite so that the feet are at the origin, because this orange cross here is ultimately the point that's going to be used for the Y sorting. So we obviously don't want the Y sorting to happen midway up the player. We want it to be based on the player's feet position. So if you imagine the player standing on the ground and you've got like a top-down view, that's what you're going to want to use to determine the Y position for the sorting. So what you definitely want to do is take this animated character, and I probably would just take this offset and just move it up here. Unfortunately, you'd also need to move the health box and damage boxes like so, and the collision shape underneath this character body 2D. And then in the level here, you want to turn on Y sort enabled here. And then we need to go to the world. And because of the way the world is set up here, if I go to world, the player is here. So I'm assuming when the level is instantiated, yeah, it's just added as a child. So the level gets added as a child underneath this world node. So in order to get the Y sort to work, you actually have to enable Y sorting on the world as well. Y sort is inherited. So as long as there's an unbroken chain of Y sort enabled going down to all the node 2Ds, then everything underneath all the descendants of those node 2Ds or all the direct children of those node 2Ds will be Y sorted. So basically the player now is going to be Y sorted along with everything in the level 1, because level 1 has Y sort enabled and world has Y sort enabled here. For easier explanation, I'll just instantiate level 1 here and do editable children. And so since this is Y sort enabled and this is Y sort enabled, then all of these are going to be Y sorted along with the player here. Let me just see if that works at a basic level. Actually, it looks like it's still not working. So one easy way I could test this actually is go back to world, instantiate that level 1 again, and just move the player around. So now I've disabled some of the collision shapes, but yeah, it looks like this Y sorting is actually not working. Oh, there's a problem in here too. Yep, I just figured it out. So the player actually has a Z index of 10. So Y sorting only works on the same Z index. So this has to share a Z index with everything else being Y sorted. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Now, I'm probably going to break something here because I don't know why the Z index is set to 10. Generally speaking, if you find a need to set your Z index to control ordering, I would regard that as a code smell. That doesn't mean that it's always wrong to do it, but if you use the z-index as a quick fix to fix some kind of rendering ordering issue, I would very strongly recommend reevaluating what you're doing, because you are going to end up with situations now where I'm trying to get Y sorting to work and it's like, why isn't it working? It's because the z-index has been set to some non-standard value, to non-zero. And if you do that with a bunch of nodes all over the place, you're going to quickly find that you lose control over the rendering of all kinds of things, and it's just going to be a mess. So I would use the z-index ordering very sparingly and very cautiously. Typically, though, I don't really find a need to use z-index outside of very specific situations. So here, I'm just going to set this to 0 now. And now if I take this player, you can see now that the player is rendering behind the enemies. See how that's working? Now the enemies still have their origin set in the midpoint of their body. So you can see that as the player's feet cross that midpoint, the player renders in front. So you'd want to apply that same fix of reorienting the enemies so that their feet are on top of the origin. And then you'll have a very nice Y sort enabled there. But that's a tangent. I'm not going to go too deep on that. Just something to mention here. One thing that's interesting that's happening with the player is there's this movable character body 2D, which is implemented as a component, which is good. But what's weird that's happening in here is that the character body 2D is a child of this player node. And what's happening is inside of the physics process in the movable script, the move and slide is happening, but then the position is being reset here. So the entity, which is the root node, here. So if I look at my movable here, entity is player, it's that root node. And by the way, you can click on this dots menu here and go show node in tree, and it will highlight that node for you. So that's a quick way of identifying it. But the movable here is targeting the player as the root node, which is fine. It's setting the entity's position to the global position. So there's actually a minor bug here. You shouldn't really be mixing and matching positions and global position here. This should actually be global position. We don't want to set the position because that could create issues down the line. Obviously, it works in this case because the world is at the origin at 0, 0. So the local position and the global position for entities ends up being the same number. But I still would use the global position always. If you're setting a global position to something, it should always be assigning it to another global position and not to a local position. Otherwise, again, you're just opening opportunities for error to arise. So anyway, what's happening in here is this global position is being set to the entity's global position, and then the local position is being reset to 0. So basically, this character body 2D is being used for motion. The motion that happens during that physics frame is being applied to the root node, and then the local position of the character body 2D is being reset to 0. I'm going to admit this is a kind of a wonky way of doing entities. I think that this may be a case of composition run amok. I understand the point. I understand the desire to make this composable, where you just use a plain node 2D as the player, and then you have like a movement component and health boxes and damage boxes and so on and so forth. That impulse, that tendency is good. However, I think for things like character bodies 2Ds, where it causes you to have to write weird code like that, where you have to reset the position every frame based on the movement, I think that that's a case where probably you don't really want to do that. What I would do instead is I would do this. I would always make my entities a root type of character body 2D. And what I've done in my games, like in Gunforged, is I take that root type character body 2D, let's just call it like an example enemy. And if I want to modularize or componentize the movement, what I do is this. I'm just going to sketch this out. I'm not going to write any code necessarily. I'm just going to give you the idea. So what I would do here is I would add a node and I would have a velocity component here. And this velocity component could control the velocity value. So this would store a long-lived velocity value, and then this would assign that velocity value to the character body 2D every frame. And this would also provide methods for acceleration, deceleration, anything that you'd expect, but purely just a manipulation of velocity. And then what I would do is I would add, I'm not sure this game uses pathfinding, I don't think so, but let's say you're using pathfinding or you have some kind of pathfinding algorithm. It doesn't even need to be like A star or anything. It could just be like the enemy's making a beeline to the player. What I would do is I would add maybe a type of node 2D, so we have position information, and I would write a pathfind component that provides methods for steering or determining the direction that the character body 2D is supposed to go. And then you can move the character body 2D in conjunction with these things. So pathfind component, I might write a method. So in pathfind component, I might make a method that's called func follow path. And then this is the body, character body 2D. And then this would contain, you know, path find logic here applied to body. And then in my example enemy, if I were to make a script here, what I would do is I would say, you know, func physics process pathfind component dot follow path this, or self rather. So that's how I would typically orient it. So again, you're still using composition to control the movement. It's just that it's not doing weird resetting. You're still just moving the root node, but all of the logic that provides how the thing should move is happening at these component levels. So that's the way that I would probably approach it. Now, that said, this certainly works. It's just a little bit weird. I think it makes more sense to make the root node the character body 2D. Now, just a minor comment here. This dash range has a dash in it. I think naming your things consistently, this should probably be an underscore here. That's a very tiny nitpick, but I think consistency is important. And there's all kinds of like differentiated casing here too. We've got a capital M here, lowercase h. So I think just generally speaking, for the developer, I would recommend using consistent naming and casing for your components here and your nodes. You can either do all lowercase like you've done or Pascal case. I'm going to show you something actually. So by default, I think Godot nodes are Pascal case. But if you don't like that, you can actually go to project settings. And if you search casing and you go to editor naming section, there's node name casing here. You can change this to snake case if you like. And then that means that anytime I add a new node, animation player, see how it automatically snake cases that node name for you? So if that's the style that you prefer, go into the project settings and change that style there. I want to mention something here too, which is that these explosion particles look really good. And what I think is really interesting about this is that they look really good even though they're just static sprites. So this developer is doing a really good job of using particles. So if I press Control R, there's a little tip for you. If you have a particles node selected, you can press Control R to burst it. And I think this applies if it's one-shot enabled. So you can see quickly how this looks by hitting Control R. But look at how rudimentary these shapes are. These are circles, these are triangles, and then these are squares. And that is all playing in conjunction with, it looks like this sprite, which is just scaled up. And in game, that looks really good. And I'll tell you why it looks really good in just a second, but let's take another look at it here. The reason that looks so good is because the game is a pixelated game. So if we go to project settings, if we go to display, we've got viewport stretch mode. And what that does is that basically takes the resolution, which is 426 by 240, and it just scales it using nearest neighbor. It's rendering at a low resolution and then scaling it up. And that's what creates that really chunky pixel look. And with a chunky pixel look like what's going on in here, you can see how the gun rotation is very like pixelated, which looks great. But it's really easy to create good looking effects with just simple shapes like that, because it just creates like it creates a little bit of muddiness in a good way. You can get away with a lot in terms of your pixel effects when you're dealing with low resolution. Simple shapes, simple art can really go a long way. And this game's effects look really, really good. I think this game is using very simple effects to great effect. One other thing that I actually mentioned now that I'm noticing it is that when I shifted this player here, I actually think it's a bad idea to make your collision shape 2D for your character bodies. It's a bad idea to make it occupy the entirety of the entity. What I typically do is I just take a collision shape like a circle and I orient it around the feet. So if I shrink this down to something like 4 or maybe even 3, and I just put this down here so that the bottom of the circle is touching the bottom of the origin line, the X origin line here. And now you'll see why I prefer that, because now I can navigate the environment a lot easier. See how I can go through here? Now the Y sorting is a problem. You'd have to fix the tile set for the Y sorting, but you can see how I can run up against walls now, and it's really just the bottom of my feet that are colliding. And if the Y sort was operating correctly, that would look very natural, because then I'd be able to overlap a little bit the tile set. It adds a little bit of depth to the game. But also when I'm trying to run around corners like this, you see I get a lot of grace here. I can like cut the corner very tightly, even though my head is sticking through the terrain. I can navigate very easily around it. So final thoughts on this project. I think that composition is used relatively well. I think the main thing that I would say is these character body 2D should be the root nodes, and there should be different components made to control the movement rather than using the character body 2D as a component to control movement itself. I think the health box and the damage box are working great. I think that using that for the coin and then intercepting the damage from that player damage box to collect the coin, I think that that's a little bit awkward semantically, but I think it's a clever use of the code that's already been written to accomplish a goal. So I'm kind of ambivalent on that. I think it's a clever use again, but I probably wouldn't do it that way personally. Again, do whatever works for you and your project. If it saves you effort and it makes sense to you, then by all means do that. But yeah, generally speaking, I think that this is a very solid top-down shooter template. I think the effects look great. And I think with just a few minor tweaks to the things that I've mentioned, you'd have a very solid foundation here. So thank you to the developer, who again is going to remain anonymous, but thank you anyway for submitting to this channel and to this code review series. If you want to have your code potentially featured in a code review video, use the Google form link in the description below to submit your Godot project. I am accepting projects at any stage of development, and leave a comment below. What did you find most interesting about this project? Is there any particular tip that I had that you thought was insightful or not? Let me know in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got a lot of value out of it, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching this video. If you want to support my work, you can purchase one of my courses, you can purchase my game Gunforged on Steam, and you can sign up for my email list at firebelly.com. All the ways that you can support me are linked in the description below.